Welcome to The Interviewers, a podcast for experts and influencers with advice and tips for getting booked on podcasts. This show is brought to you by guestexpertsonair.com. Here's your host, Joseph Schinwald.
Welcome to today's episode for guest experts who want to chess up their marketing with podcast appearances. Our guest today is Jason Cercone. Hello, Jason.
Joseph, how are you, my friend?
I'm great, thank you. Now I'm embarrassed because I didn't ask you before, actually. Cercone, is this the right pronunciation?
It's actually Cercone, but I'm sure back in the old country it was Cercone. That's at least what my family thinks before everybody started making their way over to America.
You think from Italy?
Yeah.
Okay. Cercone.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So wonderful to have you on my podcast because you're actually the exact expert anybody would look for interviewing when the topic is about podcast guesting. You have so much experience in all this. So our topic today for the show is how a podcast guesting tour can accelerate your branding. So let me explain a little bit about who Jason Cercone is, his biography. Jason is a creative professional, strategist, and podcaster. He is actually also the founder of Cercone Consulting, which has, we will talk about this during the interview, which has services very, very specifically helping podcast guesting for experts and brands optimize their appearances. So he's the founder of Cercone Consulting, where he helps brands and professionals maximize the podcast platform through impactful, optimized guest marketing campaigns. He also has several podcasts. One is the host of Evolution of Brand, a podcast featuring self-defined entrepreneurs and professionals sharing inspirational stories and tactical brand building strategies. And then you have some other ones, but this is the main one. And then Jason has been podcasting since 2015. That's a long time ago. 600 plus episodes recorded and produced. And he has been successful, very successful, building his consulting firm, Cercone Consulting, since 2015. Moreover, he believes podcasting is the most powerful platform for enhancing brand visibility, establishing trust, becoming a thought leader, and growing an engaged, dedicated audience. Yeah, there is so many more things to say about you. I mean, I'm impressed with, I know you from Rocky Patel now because we have been actually connected through him. And we connected you as an agency. That's the irony of it. So the first question for you would be, why is the podcast platform such a powerful platform for brand building and engagement?
Yeah, I believe that brand is really what brings people to you. So you build your company, but what they relate to the most is the brand that you project and the brand that you put out into the world. And that works from a company level and from a personal level. A lot of talk about personal branding and its importance has been getting more and more steam in the world over the past several years. It's always been a big thing, but I think now with social media really being what it is and giving everybody that platform to develop their personal brand and put themselves out there, everybody's taking advantage of it. So when it comes to projecting your brand and really putting together a strategy that's going to resonate with a specific customer base, it's all about telling a good story. And the podcast platform is the greatest platform for telling a good story. If you go on a podcast that is relevant to your space, to your mission and your message, and you connect with an audience, not by selling to them as a guest, but by impacting them through a good brand story, through the level of expertise that you have on your subject, you have such an amazing opportunity to captivate that audience and then bring them into your circle. Because if you do things right, they're going to instinctively look to you for more value. So if you go on a podcast and really knock it out of the park, give them a good call to action, they're going to take it. They're going to follow it. They're going to say, this guy's good. This girl's great. I want more from them. So they come over to your website. They start listening to your podcast. They start listening to or start watching videos on your YouTube channel. Whatever your directive is, if you impact that audience in a strong way through your brand story, they're going to come over to your side and get more. So that platform, as it continues to grow and more people begin to start a podcast, they need quality guests that are knowledgeable on specific subjects. So if that's you, you can really go on those shows and be just as strong of a part that makes that show take off as the host and the producers behind it. It's incredibly powerful. And the medium is not slowing down. There is a lot happening in the podcast space. People are just now starting shows. I'm sure before I even finish this sentence, someone will have launched a new podcast. So we're all getting better at this medium. We're continuing to really define what it is. And if you've got a good story to tell and a message that you want to amplify, doing it as a podcast guest is the only way to fly.
Yes, I agree. And yet, it's obvious for many of my clients with whom I talk frequently, to re-strategize or prospects when you talk with them, because I have this agency where we connect experts with podcasts. It's a premium service, one of the best podcasts. But I see because there's this distinction between those who don't really care. They go on podcasts, on many podcasts, and they would even sometimes just always have the same script talking about it. And that doesn't bring much value to the podcast host, of course, either. And it's easy to find those connections. There are all these matching platforms out there, and you can get really good podcasts there. But most of the time, it's that back-rubbing thing. It reminds me of SEO, search engine optimization, which I did with Rocky Patel. We know him together. I mean, there was in Stompernet, in that membership site, way back 2006. We exchanged links. One website exchanged link with other. It wasn't had no meaning, and it did help a little bit in the ranking. But ultimately, it would have been much better to do something much more creative, reaching out to great websites for writing a guest post, right? And then get that link back maybe to your website. Well, it's what I see all the time. I mean, I'm at an age with a certain experience where I see, things really repeat themselves with young marketers, new marketers, and then the ones who are already a little bit seasoned and have gone through this maybe through other, movements or other developments at another time. So yeah, for me, it's and then this the other group, and I'm talking more about those now. The other group is when you make this distinction, right? They do care a lot about which kind of podcast they are on, because they have developed a very accomplished life. They have this incredible retreats once a year. They cost $10,000, whatever each, and they make millions of dollars, and they are just solo entrepreneurs, have their own brand, just like you're saying with the branding. And they want to know more about it because they have had a podcast tour for half a year. They were on 50 podcasts, and they wanted to promote their book, but they were never happy with the results. But it's not because they shouldn't have been happy with the results. It's because they have no idea of how to measure the whole thing, how to bring it out in smaller forms, smaller clips, maybe the episodes on their social media platform, so people actually see that they are the authority, the go-to expert, and they're everywhere, right? And they could listen 5 minutes, right? Because they don't like to jump on a whole episode right away. But it's really the main problem is this: a few people don't care, if I can make it simplified, and they like to just go on. So as many podcasts as there are, because they have some urgency in their message and they want to get it out, but they don't look for the really quality stuff, quality podcasts. And they repeat themselves a lot because, if it's not a really quality podcast, then the host usually doesn't sometimes ask very unique questions either. So, they get to talk always about the same thing. And what value is this, right? And then there are the other ones. And there's this guy he has just recently asked me so many questions. And, he has a New York bestseller, a book, This is a very famous university professor. He launches another one, and he says he was on 50 podcasts, but he doesn't know whether it did help him in any way. But yes, he had a New York bestseller, right? But no, I understand him. It's like, you get to the interview, and first it gets booked for you, then it gets the appearance, the interview itself, and then the appearance, and then the expert loses often that whole tracking. He doesn't even know when it appears, right? So then the only thing he has in mind is, I was on 50 podcasts, but what difference did it make, right? Yeah. And that would be a question, a follow-up. I mean, I see the distinction. And what would you think? What would you tell somebody who is already very accomplished and has maybe 120,000 people on his Facebook business page and all his Twitter and LinkedIn followers? What would you say to somebody like this when you talk about brand acceleration? Brand acceleration, like you have it on your website. It's one of your services, like to accelerate their branding. How would it be measured? How would sales be measured actually? Unless you have this incredible ecosystem of profitability on the website, then you can see it. I mean, you will see more sales because they just come in. But if you have like vague things, like brand building is very vague. It's a good thing. I mean, we know it. It's very good. I mean, it's great to have it, worth billions of dollars in certain cases. Yet it's so difficult to actually say why to an expert like this, to say why, let's say, a podcast with a global rank from Listen Notes, podcast search engine, most popular one, let's say a global rank of 0.5, like among 3 million, whatever, and a listen score of maybe 70, why that would be helping him in any way, because download numbers, we don't get them. It's a complicated thing with download numbers. I mean, it's not like one place out there and you can say, this is the podcast and these are the downloads they have for that particular episode. I don't know any place like this. And they want that. They want that information actually, but nobody has it.
Yeah, but information is irrelevant, honestly. Download numbers, in regards to being a podcast guest, download numbers should never be a metric that you're looking at. I mean, downloads to me, we can get really deep and granular into this. Download numbers do not equate to a listen. A download number just means that somebody had a podcast delivered to their device. They may not have listened to it yet. They may not listen at all. I know I'm guilty of this. I'm subscribed to many podcasts, and they will all get funneled into my podcast app when a new episode goes live. That's the power of being subscribed. But if you don't listen to that show, what's the difference? So if somebody says, yeah, we get 55,000 downloads an episode. Okay, well, how many people are listening to that episode? I'd have to figure that a good number of them are, but it's not just about the download metric. And Joseph, you mentioned that people not being able to track what they're getting from their podcast interviews. And I think the biggest thing to keep in mind is if you stick to your space, to your niche, you're going on podcasts that are related to your message, you have a better chance of getting more long-term results because podcasts are always growing. The audience is growing. As long as the producers are putting out new content and they're marketing their show well, you have that opportunity for new listeners to join into that show at any point. And when they do, oftentimes they're going to go back through the catalog and they're going to find episodes that stand out to them. So if it's related to a specific topic, more than likely your interview is going to be a part of that. So you constantly have this opportunity to bring in new people to your circle, which is one of the beauties of a good podcast guesting campaign is you can build evergreen content that can serve your brand for years, because there's no guarantee that someone's going to find your show today, but they might find it tomorrow. They might find it a week or a month or a year from now. But once you have that content out there, it's going to serve you for a long time. The opposite side of that is if you go on shows that aren't related to your industry and aren't related to your message and have no bearing on what you want to accomplish, then yeah, you're not going to be able to track that. And that's just going to be an interview for interview's sake. If you want to do that, you can. There's no stopping you, but it's not as focused, and it could ultimately be a waste of your time, just depending on how much you're valuing your time in this particular space in regards to building your brand.
Yeah, I think as an agency, I always think, that the first question I ask in the vetting process when I talk with experts is that, the audience, what is your audience? Because the audience they want to reach their wider audience. They don't want to just reach anybody, So when we know their audience, then we can look at how we can reach their wider audience with researching the podcasts who have this in certain interviews or in the description or in the title. The title doesn't often help that much because, it's like more in other areas. Other people's have been interviewed. So for me, the question really, Jason, would be for you. I mean, besides from how many episodes a podcast host already has produced, how many Apple reviews he has, what was his last show? Was it last month or 6 months ago or just a week ago? What are the other guests he has invited? There are so many, what is his website? What are his social media? What is his presence? Does he show episodes there? How does he market the episodes he makes, right? So there are so many other very relevant. Even though I have to say that those clients who really want to download numbers because they're ignorant, because they don't know that the download numbers are just really skewed, It's like meaningless, except for somebody who wants to post about them, right? Like a host wants to post about them, but then he cannot really prove it anyway. So look, how many, what kind of additional indicators would you think of to determine that a podcast is the right podcast for this guest?
You mentioned one of the big ones that I look at first is how frequently are they releasing content? And if I have a 30-day window when I'm looking at podcasts, if they're outside of 30 days since they've produced an episode, I usually don't reach out to that podcast. I don't rule it out because maybe they're just on a break and they may come back. So I would keep it on my list, but I wouldn't necessarily reach out immediately. I look at the aesthetic appeal of a podcast. What kind of cover art do they have? Does it look creative? Does it actually jump out, or do they just throw a couple quick images onto a blank background and put their name on it? That's the first thing that people see when they search through a podcast app for a certain show. That cover art needs to stand out. So are they thinking creatively? Because to me, that all bleeds into the rest of the production. If the cover art looks good, that means that at least it's a good indicator that they're putting emphasis on the overall creativity of their production. So I'll look at the cover art. I'll look at the title of the show. Is it clever? Does it actually resonate and have an SEO spin to it, to where they are trying to get their show noticed and discovered? And then I'll look at some of the reviews because I want to get an idea of what people have to say about the show. I mean, and that can go good. That can be good or bad, but ultimately, one bad review isn't going to be a deal breaker for me, but I'm going to look to see what people have to say. And then, Joseph, you also mentioned a great thing to look at is their presence outside of their podcast. How are they utilizing social media to promote their show? Do they have a website that's dedicated to the episodes that they're producing? So they're not just relying on the podcast host site, which could be like a Buzzsprout or a Sounder.fm or something to that effect. Are they doing more to get their show discovered? Because that's one of the big issues with podcasts is discoverability. So if you're not doing your part as the show's producer, then do I want to be a part of that production? So if I'm seeing that this is all lacking, more than likely I'm not going to reach out, because I want to reach out to shows that when I go on and make an impact, I know they're going to do their part to put that message out there so more people can find it. And you had mentioned SEO earlier. That's one of the unsung heroes of podcast guest marketing, in my opinion, and podcast guesting as a whole. Every time you go on a podcast, the shows that are doing it right, the shows that have a website, even the shows that are working their show notes in a good way through their host and actually putting information in there that's relevant to the show, whether it be through takeaways and bullet points or actually doing a almost blog post like breakdown of the show. If they put a link to your page from the call to action that you leave.
That gives you choose.
That link will then points back to your site. And these are coming from highly ranked, highly authoritative websites. So when Google sees your link constantly popping up on all these different sites, that's going to build your website's authority. Then you get noticed. So you start developing brand recognition and brand visibility from that capacity. Yeah. So SEO is a big one. And I think that's something that doesn't get a lot of talk in this space, but I sing it from the mountaintops because I feel that's one of the most powerful aspects.
Mm-hmm. Even if you Google the name of the expert and he has some really interesting podcast appearances, they will sometimes show up on the first page of Googling the expert. Mm-hmm. And then you can click on it and you can listen to this, right? The SEO benefit, I mean, it's also the variety, right? I mean, you get all these links from different places, but if they don't include also podcasts, well, if you have them included, so links also come to your website from podcasts, that means higher status, because it's really not like, it would be over optimization if you say it's only one thing, links only from blogs, whatever. No, it's like directories, blogs, podcasts, whatever. It's always the variety that really makes the ranking very effective. And you can easily, this is often overlooked. The ranking is not the great thing. I mean, if you do it right nowadays, best practice, and you do this social media stuff and podcasting, your site has a good chance to get on the first page, and then you make a few tweaks. Tweets won't help you. Yeah. So that's
they can.
And you know what I also think, Jason, and that was Rocky Patel who got me from the PowerPoint group, Power Persona group, Facebook group. He mentioned to me also, we have been talking about this subject, and I noticed with my clients, which sometimes over half a year, that they are really not really using their podcast appearances well. Like, as I said, they lose track of them, right? They go on these interviews, and then who knows what happens afterwards. But I think what is a very good service, which I add on now, and everybody can, of course, but we have a very talented person helping us with this. It's like, when it's a video, you can make you can chop it up, the interview, make little 5 minutes videos. When it's audio, and often is only, you can do the same. So you give them 5 minutes, title, description, and you know what? Then they can download it from Google Drive. But the beautiful thing is what I see with my experts. There's so many, followers on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, so many, like 20K, 100K, 120K, honestly, amazing. But, I don't see that they share the podcast interviews. And sometimes they do, but then it's a full podcast, right? A full one. I think what they need to see is more smaller amounts on social media, because social media, when you're on Facebook, you're not going there to listen 50 minutes to a podcast episode.
Right.
But when you see this little snippet of 5 minutes and that person, it, and there's a good topic now and you want to listen in. So, that is the point. And also the authority which comes with it and all this. But ultimately, it's also a real good strategy for content, because whenever a person goes on a podcast, let's say they have 4 appearances a month, but that is at least 3 hours of content where they get interesting questions asked if they're on good podcasts, right? If they're on good podcasts. So now they get to answer these questions from a different angle. They have never seen themselves and experienced themselves talking like this about their expertise, because you can talk about it from 360 degrees. And now they have really great content again for their followers. But they don't do it. So we are doing it now. We're getting started with it. And I think it's a great thing, because we always talk about downloads, and all this. But, also the podcast guest has a responsibility. You see, he now has produced through the help with somebody else great content. It's going to be published because he's leveraging the other person's audience. Instead of building his own podcast, he leverages other people's audiences, hopefully similar to his own. But ultimately, he also has to tell his own audience again, look, so many podcasts, all the time I'm invited to podcasts, right? Look, I'm really the authority. I'm the go-to expert, you see? that's their responsibility. I think they can outsource it, of course, and we want to do that a little bit, but it's both ways. You want to have the podcast host do the promotion of the podcast, and the platforms, of course, they do it anyway. Search engine, somebody looks for this particular topic, he will find, most likely, if it's a good episode, that topic here on the first page of Google research. I mean, that's pretty good. And then it's the host, the client, also the guest expert. I think very important.
I think it's very important, Joseph. And really, what we're talking about is short attention spans. Mm-hmm. And when this goes beyond podcasting, but there's a couple things to keep in mind when it comes to the podcasting platform. For one, with social media, with the short attention spans, you only have a couple minutes to really capture somebody, and you only have a couple seconds to grab their attention. So absolutely, they're more prone to stick around for a quick video snippet that it will still do its job to put you in a position of authority and showcase that you have knowledge on the subject, because people are in scroll holes, scrolling on to the next piece of content, see what comes next. But if you put something that's 55, 60 minutes out there, yeah, you can pretty much guarantee they're not going to stick around for that, because that's not even an attention span thing. That's just like, we have other things to do with our day.
Yeah, but it takes longer to go to the bottom of the newsfeed in Facebook.
It does, but this
I'm
is
kidding.
the big thing about no, 100%. No, I'm with you there. But one of the big things to remember with social media is they're not all podcast listeners. Some of them might be, but not all of them. So if you're just putting podcast specific content in place that's 30 minutes long, 40 minutes long, whatever, the chance of being discovered on social media and then getting those people to jump over and listen to the full episode on a podcast platform is difficult, because they may not be podcast listeners. Like I said, some of them may be, but for the most part, they're just in a scroll hole looking at content on their favorite social media platform. That's why that short little 2 to 3 minute, easy to digest, easy to get a lesson across content is so important.
Yeah, it's also visually stimulating, because they see
absolutely
their perception is really that expert. This is a real expert. He's always on new podcasts, right? I mean, that alone, I feel is very, very strong.
Well, and then to give another point to podcast guesting, if you want people to follow you, let's say you've started a podcast of your own and you want more listeners to come over to your show, going on other podcasts that are relevant to your show or similar to your show means you're connecting with an audience that likes that content. They're already podcast listeners because they're listening to you on a podcast. They're converted. It's very easy for you to say to them, hey, if you dig this show and you like what I have to say, I have a show about the same thing. Come over and listen to me. They're on a podcast platform already. It's very easy for them to say, all right, I'm going to go subscribe to that show now too. Yeah. Versus trying to get person to get out of their scroll hole on Facebook or Instagram and jump over and join you on the show. So that's why you hit it. The repurposing of content is enormous. And the more people that are getting a handle of that are the ones that are succeeding, because they're putting themselves out there in a number of different ways and making an impact through each of those platforms.
Yes. You're helping experts, thought leaders, authors of books, whatever, those who want to go on a podcast tour, you're helping them specifically with being optimized for the podcast tour, for the podcast appearance. Not everybody is some people have experiences with public speaking. Others are afraid of it, like death is less fear. And, you're helping them. So can you tell me more about your program? It's called Podcast Guest Accelerator, I think. And it's on your website.
Accelerator, yes.
Just pull your website. Your website is easy to find. It's Jason Cercone. And Cercone, maybe you want to spell it again for people who listen to it in the car and they want to see the website afterwards. So Jason?
Sure, yeah, jasoncercone.com/guest accelerator, but we'll talk all about that. Yeah, I'm actually in the process as we speak, and by the time this podcast reaches your ears, this may already be out there, and if it is, you'll find it on the Guest Accelerator page. I'm building a training program that speaks to everything we've been talking about and a lot more. And ultimately, the goal is to make sure that anybody that's going on podcasts as a guest is fully optimized for each aspect of what that campaign can do for them. And I'm talking from the standpoint of understanding the expectations of what the podcast platform is all about. eliminating the silver bullet theory of thinking if you go on the Joe Rogan experience, that's going to be the be all end all and that'll solve all your problems, because that's not the case whatsoever. Plus, getting on the Joe Rogan experience is not something that most of us can accomplish. Making sure that your presentation for reaching out to podcasts is good. Now, I know a lot of people work with an agency, which is great. They can work with that agency to make sure that their quote unquote pitch or their presentation is honed. It's going to get them responses, because when people reach out to podcasts, sometimes their presentation or their pitch is very flat. It contains no value. It doesn't excite that podcaster when they read it or see a video of it or whatever to say, yeah, I want this person on my show. We want to make sure we're presenting you, or you want to make sure that you're presenting yourself, I should say, in a way to get you booked, so you can then go on that show and make an impact.
Yes, it's not all.
But that's just the beginning. So once you're into the program, now you need to communicate effectively and set yourself up for to have a plan of attack when you go on that show, and know your brand story and know what you want to talk about. And then while you're on the show, make sure you're making an impact and doing what you need to do to make sure you're getting over with the audience and the host, because the host will sell you as the resource, as the authority, if you do a good job. There's a lot of elements to it. There's a lot of moving pieces. And that's why I feel what I put in place is something that helps people get beyond just thinking it's turning on a microphone and talking. If you really want to get results from your efforts in a podcast guest space, you have to be optimized. You have to be ready to make an impact. You have to understand what it means to be value driven versus being a salesperson. Nobody wants to listen to a half hour or an hour infomercial. So you can't go on a podcast and sell. You have to go on a podcast and provide value. That's where the impact comes from. That's where the impact comes from. And that's what makes people stand up and take attention or give attention and say, wow, this guy knows what he's talking about. I want more. This girl has everything I'm looking for. I'm going to go listen to their show. I'm going to go check out their website. I'm going to go get their book or their giveaway or whatever. You want to evoke emotion and you want to invoke a response. And you have to know how to do that to make it happen effectively. That's what Guest Accelerator is all about.
Nice. Well, it's like, it's definitely for advanced people already a little bit, because I know people, they're not even sure about their framework, about their expertise. Mm-hmm. But, it's like, I think once you understand that you need a compelling story, and, that is all inner work, I mean, what do you leave out, right? What do you leave in? Compelling story,
right?
Brand story, you call it brand story. Expertise, yeah. I mean, expertise for me is like, when you, the host can ask you any question. Doesn't matter. You can always bring it back to your expertise. And so frameworks are good. I think every
100%.
person who is on a show talking about an expertise should have a framework. And then people are more interested. And, if there are some tools, some online courses, the ecosystem of the website is super important, because, if I just sell a book, and I might have written a great book. I have one client, he wrote the book, The Meaning of Life. He's a very humble person, very intelligent, all this super book. I read it, but he's only interested in the book. He makes enough money with other things. So the profit, the ecosystem of profitability on the website isn't there. But for others, it's very important, because, unless you have not just books, but also other services where people can buy from you. They can check you out. Like on your website, you right away have interesting things to download, like optimization checklist for your guest appearances and this. And then you get the email, and then they receive more value information. So, but when people say I don't have any result with this, it's often because they sell a book, and that's not easy to track. No, you cannot say I sold more books now because of this podcast appearances. You probably will. You do, but it's not difficult. It's not easy to measure.
Yeah, or you're just working the circuit. No, I mean, if you're just working the circuit, that's fine. I mean, you can go on hundreds of interviews. That's what, celebrities do that to promote a movie. The president of the United States will do that when they're doing sound clippets for certain demographics and markets. So yeah, like that's a thing you can do. But if you really want to know that this is at least got some trackable, tangible takeaway for you when the day is done, you want to follow the process and do it right. So you can go on as many shows as you want, but will that be a good use of your time? Probably not. How about you pick a couple quality shows where you know you're speaking to an audience that wants to buy your book because they're into that type of topic? That's a better use of your time, and that's going to produce better results in the long run, because as that show grows, you now have a piece of content that's providing an impact. So start thinking of it in those respects and in those terms, and you'll start seeing better outcomes when the day is over.
Yes. It's interesting because, when you are doing your own podcast, you find out this is very different from what I thought it is, because you're getting these incredible experts. In the beginning, I was preparing like 8 hours for it. I knew so much that the first of all, the interview wasn't so interesting anymore because I've read everything out there, and then I would even interrupt sometimes because my head was just full of it. Then you learn that these are very extraordinary people, and I'm here to really learn from them and their expertise. Wow, mind blown. And then, you just look at the main things. You can ask your questions, and then you learn a lot, and then you edit it, and then you learn again. So it's a fascinating thing. I never knew that there is such a democracy out there with the intelligence, I mean, there are so many experts out there, right? And very humble. You would never notice them, You would never notice unless you have them on a podcast interview. And so this is interesting. And, there are probably lots of skills for them to optimize like you offer, to be more engaging, to be more interesting, so many other things, a little humor, and I think it's often the compelling story. I mean, because when you hear the story, you're either drawn into it or that doesn't interest me. But then there's a good story, then it becomes so believable also, and you're the expert. You have the framework, and then you're funny and interesting and engaging, and you're not self-promoting. You can also listen and all this. I think that it's a skill which can be learned, I'm sure, and a lot of people already have the talent for it. But everybody should actually look into it before they actually go on podcast tours, unless they have already experience with it. I remember when I was sorry.
Yeah. I was just saying that's the thing. I mean, whether you're seasoned or whether you're brand new, it doesn't hurt to make sure that you've got the process in place that works for you. And there's probably a couple intangibles that you didn't realize, and even a couple tangibles that you didn't realize can serve you in the long run. So having that education and that foundation underneath you is going to make for a much better experience. And then the more shows you go on, the more you get comfortable with your voice. You start to realize that you have a couple vocal quirks that you need to work out. And once you do, everything flows more naturally. And it just takes time and practice to get there. It's just like, I'm a big golfer. And that's one of the things for me. I've been golfing since I was 7 years old. I'm still learning things, and I'm still taking practice swings to get better. You have to think of podcast guesting in the same respect. The more interviews you do, and the more times you get to tell your story to the right audience, the more naturally you're going to be able to tell it, which is going to make you more compelling, and it's going to make people want to be in the same room with you with everything else that you do.
Yes, and what I also often heard is that people appreciate that they are meeting really intelligent hosts, and this host has asked questions about their expertise and about their life they've never been asked before, and they have been now talking on this recorded show of things very valuable to them, but they never talked about it before. So that is the beautiful thing. So that's why I think it's a unique way. You have to make the distinction. It's not YouTube channels; it's different, but it can be also on there, of course, on a YouTube video instead. But it has its own properties, so to speak, right? And I'm not saying it's 100%. The one thing, the one solution for all your marketing. No, but it's a good one. No. It's a good channel. And you always have to have several channels in your marketing. And that's coming back to the branding, the acceleration. It's happening. And I think you would agree through that additional marketing channel. Because you defined branding as people, that's how people find you, right?
Right. Yeah, that's how people find you. That's how they identify with you. And that's how they become an advocate for what you do. Mm-hmm. You have to have a brand in place that tells that story and compels them and makes them get bought in to what you're all about, who you are, what you do, and how you do it. If you don't have a brand in place that conveys that in a very compelling, engaging way, it's going to be harder to gain traction and therefore build your audience.
Yeah, we're talking again about this phenomenon of attention span, right? I mean, it's like, nowadays you don't have the chance to explain yourself all the time. Again, the best thing is if they hear your name or your company or your brand, and then they associate right away the right thing with it.
Right on. No, you're 100% right. And again, it's having that message out there in a way that compels people to want to take action. So if you look at the podcast platform, again, I go back to what I said when we first started talking today, Joseph. The podcast platform is all about storytelling.
Exactly.
It is a great venue for telling a good story. And if you've got a good story, get on some podcasts and tell it to people that want to hear it. It's going to be awesome in regards to your brand growth.
Yes, I have a good story, but I've hardly told it. But I'm already eager to share it. Rocky Patel is going to interview with some. But, we have all good stories. It's amazing, It's like this. This is also a fascinating thing. You learn so many, you get to know so many other people's lives and you're touched by it. And, it's even like a little bit of a stretched example, but if you have a trauma, you think that you're the only one in the whole cosmos who has a trauma, Then you go out in the world and you see what everybody has one, right? I mean, it's
Absolutely.
like, and so, I like it a lot. Our conversation was fantastic. I think maybe another time it would be super to invite you again for a different topic. But today, the branding was interesting for me because I wanted to understand it. And yes, it's happening with the storytelling capability in podcasting because you get to talk about you and that creates your brand, So I wasn't clear on that, but now I am. So I'm definitely, now we are connected. So we're in the Power Persona group of Rocky Patel. We can reach out to each other again. And I really enjoyed your website. There is so much information on it. jasoncercone.com. Not just information, but you have this newsletter sign up. You explain things, just things which you really need to know for knowing more. How does this podcast guesting actually work? What do you have to do? And all this is there. Very interesting. So thank you very much, Jason.
I appreciate it. I'm glad I could come on and impact you. And I hope everybody listening feels some good impact as well. And please jump over to the website and connect with me. I'm happy to talk to anybody about this subject and help you get pointed in the right direction with podcast guesting.
Would you repeat the URL because I have this Austrian accent?
Oh, 100%. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to give everybody a unique URL that they can check out. It's jasoncercone.com/guest experts on air. jasoncercone.com/guest experts on air. And when you go there, you can pick up the free guide that I put together, 10 tips for becoming a valuable, fully optimized podcast guest. And my social media links are there too. So if you want to connect with me on your favorite platform, I'd be happy to connect with you there and carry on the conversation.
Fantastic. And we have something similar already. I mean, I offer a different service now, but my URL is guestexpertsonair.com.
That's why I did it, my friend.
Okay. I know I got it. Very smart to remember, right?
Yes, sir.
So the recap of the show with the links mentioned and will be there. And if you like this podcast, please subscribe to have you here again for our next episode. Thank you so much for listening in, and goodbye until we meet again.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Interviewers, brought to you by guestexpertsonair.com.